Okay, so guys, this video is going to cover everything we did in the first week of our Create with Code class. I'm going to go through everything kind of quickly, so this video isn't super long, but it's going to highlight all the stuff that we did, and you can go back, watch this, and help you clarify what this first project looks like. So the first thing you need to make sure you've done is you've downloaded this package from Google Classroom and made it available for you. Have it on somewhere handy, either your desktop or in your Finder or wherever you need to have it, but have it somewhere that's really close by. And I want to create a new project. I am going to name mine CwC Test. And I need to create a folder. Just already have I need to create a location for it. So this that hit right here is these three dots. New folder, CwC Test. That's going to create a folder here on my desktop right there. That's going to save all my files to make it really easy to get into. I'm going to select that folder, make sure I'm on 3D, and hit create. Now this will take just a second to get loaded. So I'm going to wait patiently for that to happen. While that's loading, the point of what we're doing is we're going to build a little player controller. I'm going to teach you player controls. And we have some preset things that are in this package that's located over here, some models for us already, add some scripts to them, and have our truck move forward, and then we're going to add left and right controls, some rotation, and some forward movement controls, like using the arrow keys to do that. But at first we won't have that. So, all right, when I first come in, my scene looks like this. Now yours might not. Yours might have the game view attached here. I like to take my game and just snap it over here to the side and make sure instead of free aspect, I go 16 by 9, so it ensures that I can see everything in the game. First thing I want you to do is to take that CwC live package here, drag it into this area right there and drop it. And it'll give you this option to import this. Hit import. Just going to give it a moment to do that. It's going to pull in all those little models that we need. When we first came into the game, we started off in a sample scene, which is like the earliest created scene. So that's why over here in the hierarchy it says sample scene. I instead want to work off of this pre-made scene. So I go into my scenes folder, and then I hit prototype 1. This is one we're going to be working in. If I double click it, you'll already get an environment in the world. So here's environment. I click that little arrow and I can see everything that's inside it. I want to click on assets right here, or I can click on it here in this underneath the project, or I can click on the name here, go into my course library, vehicles, and then there's a red truck. Drag it into my scene view. Just drag it up, drop it. It automatically highlights it here in the hierarchy and in my inspector. It has this weird name. I'm going to rename it to truck. And press my return or enter key to save that name. The transform component tells me where the position, the rotation, and the scale of the object in the world. So I want to set this at 0, 0, 0. I can just type it out, but an easier way is to click these three dots or gear. You might have a little gear over here. And I'm going to hit reset. That was right there. And that puts my truck right at the beginning of this road. And I'll double click it in the hierarchy to zoom into it. There you go. Looks great. I'm going to go ahead and add over here in the inspector. Scroll down. I'm going to add a component. I'm going to type in rigid body. And there's two of them. I'm going to choose the top one, not the 2D one. And I want to set the mass to 1,000. So this gives the truck its weight. Sorry, I don't mean to click that as schematic. Please make sure that's not clicked. All right, let's go back into the course library. Click on that once. Click on obstacles. I'm going to take a crate and do the same thing. I'm going to drag it into the world. And I can leave the name the same. It's fine. I'm going to reset its transform. So it goes right in the middle of the truck, it looks like. And I'm going to move it up 50 on the Z-axis. So that way it moves out in front of the truck. So I can see that it's right there. If I want to move my camera, I can click on this little hand over here or hit Q on the keyboard and click and drag. so I can see a little bit more of the scene if I want to. Well, that's not necessary, just so you can know where it's at. And finally, let's get your camera in a good position, just the way we would want it laid out. So I'm going to click on your main camera, and I also want to reset its position. And currently it's under the truck, so I might just take the Y and change it to, let's say 5, and change that Z to -10. And that looks probably more like what we would want a game like this to look like. So let's go back into your assets. You have 2 folders. I'm going to either hit the plus or create symbol over here to hit folder and call it scripts. SCRIPTS, scripts. Double click to go inside that folder, and I know I'm inside it because I can see the name here, and I'm going to create a C# script. Now before I hit anything, I want to make sure I get the name right. So I'm going to call this one capital P, player controller. I'm going to name it that. And give it a second. It's going to compile, and I see in my inspector that that is the same name I have here. So I will double click it, and it will open up Visual Studio for me. Sometimes Visual Studio takes a little bit to open up, and that's quite okay. You might also get this weird red warning on the bottom. That means like it's having trouble staying connected to Visual Studio. That's okay. That warning is not going to be a problem for you. It just looks a little scary, but it should be okay. Sometimes when you come into Visual Studio, a update will ask you to update. You'll just hit close. There's no need to do an update right now. All right. So let's talk about where we want, how to move our truck. I'm going to go into update, and the component that allows us to move or determines where we're at in the world is, if I click on my truck, is our transform. So we want to take that transform and just push it down the road. So in my update, I'm going to go transform, period, translate. And then we need to tell it what to move, how to move it. So I'm going to open up some parentheses. I don't want to move it on the X, which is left and right. I want it to go straight. I don't want it to go up and down, so instead I'm going to hit 0 there. And I do want it to move forward. I'm going to hit a 1 there, and then add a semicolon, as I could add it to. And I know this is not saved because there's a little circle at the top. So we're going to hit save and go back into Unity. Sometimes when you save a script, it'll take a second to compile. And even though we have the script, we don't have it on our truck. So I'm going to go over here to the inspector, hit add component, and start typing in the name of that script, which was called player control. Oh, there it is right there. I can double click it, and now it is on my truck. And what I expect it to do is to push the truck forward. So we can look in the scene or the game view, press play, and it should just push it forward. And there you go. It's going pretty fast. Probably too fast for what we're trying to do. Well, I'm going to go back into Visual Studio, and I want to change this. We never want to put hard numbers into the body of our code. We like to save those to variables at the top, and we'll talk about more about variables in a second. So to change that, I'm going to change this to a vector 3. Vector 3 means X, Y, Z, and we want it to move in the forward direction. If I save that, you'll probably see that it'll do the exact same thing, but that's just a much better way of scripting. It's a lot tighter, concise way of doing it. All right, to make sure that our game runs smoothly on all computers, we would multiply this vector 3 times forward. We're going to shift 8, that's the asterisk, to then multiply by time dot delta time. And that will probably make our character move a lot slower. Let it compile. So I saved that. It'll probably make our truck move a lot slower, but it will run that speed on every computer. So we probably want to take a number and multiply it here so that it runs a lot better. So since I don't want to put hard numbers here, I'm going to delete my line 7 and create a little space. So I'm going to press return. So line 7 for me is now open. So I pressed return and kind of create a little space there. And I'm going to create a variable to hold that number. So I'm going to say public, and we're going to make this a whole number, so a constant number, and we're going to call it, so that's another word for that is integer, so for a whole number. So int, a public int, and we will call it speed. and we will make this set to 20. So we want a speed of 20, and I will add a semicolon at the end. So that means that when the game starts, we will automatically move it at a speed of 20, but because it's a public, we'll be able to see it in the inspector and change it there. So let's multiply this by speed. So vector 3 times 4 times time.delta. And in class, I know I added some extra parentheses for order of operations, but that's not absolutely necessary, so I'll avoid it for this video. Command S, save that, and let's see if our truck runs a little bit faster. Letting it compile, and yeah, sure enough, on my truck, on the player controller script component, I see that the speed is set to 20. If I press play, it should run faster than it was before. There you go. That feels better. That feels more like, even though our truck is like flying to the moon or something. And you could change that number if you'd like to get different effects. But for our sake, we're not going to do that. All right, so we want a camera that follows our truck. So let's create a new script. Down here in my projects folder, hit plus, create a C# script, and we'll call this capital F follow, so 2 L's, player, capital P. All one word, press return, save that, and sure enough, in a second, my inspector should show me that that name matches what I have here. Open that, and it opens up a new tab inside of Visual Studio. So player controller is on one tab, and follow player is here. So first, I'm going to delete my line 7 and press return, create a little space. This script doesn't know what the player is, so we need to find that information in the world. And we're going to do that in the editor. So I'm going to create a public, and we're going to ask for it to find a game object, because that's what our truck is. It's an object in our game, and give it its nickname. A string is another way to say that. Lowercase p player. We're going to call it player. So anytime we look for it down here, we will just look for this. We use this word player for talking about our player. And our camera, to have it move, we want to do the same thing. We want to find its transform, and we want to take its position, so where it's at in the world, and make it the same as the player's transform dot position, so where it's at. So our camera will be in the same place. And I'll hit Command S to save that script. Go back into Unity, give it a second to compile, and we need to put that follow player script on our camera. So click on main camera, add component, and follow player. Now here it's asking us to choose what game object is in the world. If I press play now, we're going to get this error called a unassigned reference exception. Right here, it says it has not been assigned. So the camera was not going to move because it doesn't know what to follow. So I'm going to hit this little dot over here on my follow player script on the main camera and scroll down, or I can just type in truck and it will pull up my truck. Double click it, and now it's there. So now the camera should know, or I press play, to follow the truck. The problem is that the camera is the same exact position as the truck, which means it's going to be inside the truck. So we need to create an offset, a gap between the truck and the camera. So we can do that in the script. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio on my follow player script. And since this is going to be a number, we're going to put it up here at the top. This is going to be a public XYZ position because we want to set it off. We want to use the same numbers we used here on the camera. The position of 0, 5, -10. So those three numbers are called a vector 3. So vector 3. And we're going to give it a name offset, which is how far off it is from the object. And we need to set that. We need to make it a new vector 3. And we want to put those numbers in. So 0 on X, 5, and a -10. And of course, at every end of every line of code, we would love to have a semicolon. There you go. So we need to actually call this. We need to add these numbers to the 0, 0, 0 that's on the player. Because the player is at 0, 0, 0. And all the time, we're going to keep adding this position to our camera away from the player. So I'm going to add player.transform.position. I'm going to give a space, plus, and then offset that. I'm not saved because I see a circle, so I'm going to hit Command S. And go back into Unity, let it compile, press play. And our camera should be moving okay. Now you'll notice that it's kind of jerky. And that's actually nothing to do with the truck or anything like that. It's kind of jerky due to the fact that the camera is trying to move at the same time the truck is. They're both happening in update, so 60 frames per second, and they're happening at the same time. So on my follow player script, I want to change the word update on line 16 for me, capital L, late update, save that, and that should make a much smoother camera. Press play, and that looks a lot better. Even though we're getting this sort of janky physics here, we're not really using the rigid body for any motion and stuff. So that's why we have this kind of weird thing going on. All right, great. So now we have our camera working. The last couple things we want to do are add in our player controls. So we need to be on our player controller. So back on this script here, we're going to first think about turning left and right. That's probably more interesting to us. So turning requires a speed, how quickly we're going to turn. So I'm going to move the space down and I'm going to create a public. Now, because we're turning is kind of like involved with degrees. They're not necessarily whole numbers. We don't want to use an integer. We want to use a float. Float is another way for saying a number that's a decimal. So we're going to use a public float. We're going to call that turn speed. Put a semicolon. I could set this to 0 here, but it automatically sets itself to 0 by itself. So I'm just going to do it like that. So because we don't want our character to be turning as soon as the game starts. And we need to create a line of code that allows us to turn. So line 18, I'm going to get to the end of it and press return. It gives me a little space. I just need to make sure I'm in between these two brackets. That's important because anything between these brackets is what happens in the update. So transform, that's what controls our position. We're going to do translate again. And I'm going to open up and we're going to do a vector 3 as we did before. And this time, since it's not forward, it's going to be to the right. So right is positive numbers and left is the negative of that. So negative of right is left. So if you have any negative numbers, it'll go to the left. And if it's right, if it's a positive number, then it'll go right. And we're going to multiply this by turn speed, how quickly we want it to turn. And of course, to make sure it runs smoothly, we're going to multiply by time dot delta time. And at the end, please make sure you put your semicolon. So if I hit Command S, I need to go into, on my truck, let's look and see. And now I have a, oh, did I make it public? I might have messed up here. Let's go look and see. Oops, I made a huge mistake. And my mistake was this. No, that should be right. Make sure I've updated Unity. I need to click on the Unity background. It says, oh, I'm missing a comma. So this is how you read an error. Asset scripts player controller, line 19. So I know on my player controller script, line 19, in the 55th space from the left, there is a missing comma. So let's go look and see. Oh, I forgot my multiplication symbol right there. So that's, you know, it's kind of a very fortunate mistake to make because it's a good time to show you how that works. Now let's go look at our truck and see if we now have, yeah, we have a turn speed. Right now our turn speed is 0. If I press play on my game, I can drag over the words turn speed and it will move. And if you look in my game view, you can see that I'm turning. Positive numbers move me right, negative numbers move me left. And I can drag it back and forth. Just make sure it's set to 0 whenever you're not in play mode. But we want to control this with keys. Up here in your project settings, you don't have to do this, but I just want to show you that you have an input manager and there's some axes. And horizontal happens to be the keys that left and right or A and D control our movement. And it's named horizontal. So we want to invoke that. We want to go into our script and say, if I press anything that's left, right keys or A and D, you know, add a positive number to the right side and add a negative number to the left, and that should control our car. So I'm going to go up here to end of line 8, press return. I'm going to create a public just so we can see it. A public, and this 2 will be a float, so a decimal number, because, you know, it builds momentum when you turn left. You don't instantly just jerk left. We want to kind of build up into it. And we're going to create something called a horizontal input. So this way, whenever we push a key, it will say this is how hard we're pushing our, it gives us a number. I could set the number up here, but we don't want to set it with this. We want to set it with our keys. So, and we want it to check for us pressing the keys on our keyboard all the time, so in every frame. So line 18, I'm going to press return. I'm going to go right above all this stuff, still within these brackets. Horizontal input. I want to make it equal to, well, whatever the input, go find that axis, open parentheses, open quotation marks, that's important, horizontal, and at the end a semicolon. The reason I'm doing that, let me go back over here to Unity, show you that one more time. Project settings, it's because I need that name here has got to be spelled the same as that name right there. It's going to go look for this and say if I'm pressing any of these things, it's going to send a signal out that says horizontal is being pressed. This code will find that and say, okay, if it's positive, I'm going to go right. If it's negative, it's going to set this float to a negative number. Okay. Now, this is not done because we haven't actually, we called for it. We set horizontal input to whatever we pushed here, but we haven't actually put it into our code. So line 21 is what controls our left and right. We should make sure we multiply this. Let's take our turn speed and multiply it by horizontal input. Now, Command S. This will not work at first. So save that. Make sure you have all your semicolons and stuff. It won't work at first because on our truck, right now our turn speed is 0. It's not going to turn because it is multiplying it by a rate of 0. And so we need to make sure that we change that to something like 10. So now if I press play, I can press my left and right keys and I should get left and right motion. And you can see that in the editor down here, I'm getting a number between 0 and 1. There you go. Okay. So that works. Let's do the same thing with our forward motion. Right now our motion is being set by automatically going forward, but let's do the same thing. We're going to go to end of line 9. We're going to go to line 10 now, create a public float called forward input. So if I push forward, there you go, forward input, and I'm going to set it down here. Actually, do I need to set it down there? I think I do. Yeah. So I'm going to go to line 20, press return, forward input, make that equal to input, input dot get axis, open parentheses, the vertical axis. So the up and down, going straight and forward, right? And then I'm going to press semicolon. And the same thing, I need to multiply my speed, how fast it's going forward, by that forward input. There you go. Save that. So these look very similar. Vector 3, this one's going forward, this one's right, multiplied by its speed, and then multiplied by its input, whenever I push a key, and then time dot delta time. So now and the reason why we don't have to set a number here is because our speed was already set to 20 on the top in our variable. So it automatically comes in as a 20. So right now my truck will not move until I press forward. And then if I stop, it will stop. Press back, that works too. And then left and right. Now this looks weird, it's sliding. So let's do one more thing to fix that. I'm going to go back into my Visual Studio and we're going to play with its transform, but we're going to do it on rotation. So this one's pretty straightforward. I'm going to go to the end of line 23, press return. Going to take its transform. Oops. Try that again. Transform. But instead of translating, instead of moving it, I'm going to rotate. Rotate it. We need a vector 3. This should feel pretty familiar. So the reason we're going to call for vector 3 dot up. Up is the y-axis, so it's going to rotate along the y-axis. So if we're looking back in here, it's going to rotate along this so that it turns left and right, rotates there. So that's what that dot up means. When you do a rotate, you need to say what axis you're doing it along, and up is understood as y. And then it's going to be a little different. We're going to do a comma because we need to tell it how fast to turn along that axis. So instead of multiplying to come up with a different, like a one number, this is telling us how to quick do it along this one axis. So we're going to do it by turn speed because we want it to turn base along with our speed of turning, and also if we are pressing the horizontal input, so if we're pressing left or right. And then finally, we always want to make sure we multiply by time dot delta time. If we're doing anything related to movement, that time dot delta time is really great. At the end, I'm going to put a semicolon, save that, go back into Unity, let it compile, and then press play. And now I should be able to move forward, and my truck rotates. It feels a little bit better. It's not great. It's not the perfect controller, but it's a great place to start. So that's it. Get all that done, and then we will start adding to this project more next week.